Ladies and gentlemen, Jake Williams.
Thanks. So I was debating on whether or not to do a Who Am I slide, but I guess I have to. But look, I like InfoSec, and I think I'd kind of mention this. I really enjoy InfoSec. Some of you may have seen yesterday, although we totally did not time this, that I was endorsed by the shadow brokers or some craziness. I don't know, the New York Times and some nastiness. That was a horrible photo, by the way. They took a ton of photos, and that's the one that they used. And in fact, there was a question about whether or not I had a hoodie available. I said yes, but under no circumstances was I going to, perpetuate the hacker stereotype with the black hoodie, right? There's no, zero question that's going to happen. So, look, yeah, I think that's pretty much it, right? So let's get into the cool stuff, right? The agenda. I want to talk about privilege escalation. We get a lot of shells on Linux systems, and unfortunately, more and more, we're not root. And I want to be root, because I want to steal all the data, right? I mean, we pull regular user shells a lot, and we want to take a look at a few ways that we can start privilege escalating. Now, we talked yesterday, I think it was Derek Rook mentioned that we get into the kernel vulnerabilities, and those are awesome, don't get me wrong, but they can make a box really, really unstable. And if you're doing a pen test gig and you knock over some production server that was doing something big, it's a career-limiting move, right? Particularly if you threw that kernel exploit for the 4th time and finally you got root and then all of a sudden you disconnected and you were following the 2 is 1, 1 is none, right, verbiage there, right? So you had the 2 shells, but they both disappeared simultaneously. And then you ping the box and it's not there, and you go to re-exploit the box and it's not there. And you get that sinking feeling in your gut, pucker factor 8 kicks in, right? And this is where you don't want to be, right? And I'm here to tell you that frequently you don't need to be here. If you just take a little bit of creativity, look around, live off the land a little bit, you're going to find out that there's a lot available for you here from the privilege escalation side. So we're going to look at bash and command histories, take a look at sudo, we'll take a look at some insecure permissions. My favorite has to be setuid, because how could it not be, right? And then, of course, give a couple of closing thoughts and break for the day. Turn it back over, of course, to Mr. Ed Scotus. This is my favorite picture of a fence ever, because this is what Linux security looks like in a lot of cases to me as a pen tester, right? It's my favorite fence ever because it's a ladder, right? As you notice, very clearly, you could not make a fence. You couldn't design a fence easier to climb over. Is it in the way? Yes. Is it a speed bump? Sure, right? But my daughter, right, at 5, 6 years old, would look at that and think, playground, right? Which is kind of the theme of my talk, the privilege escalation playground, the PrivEsc playground, as it were. And so again, security often looks like this to a pen tester. So look, why are we doing this in the first place? Well, increasingly, we're not running as root, unless, of course, you work in medical. If you work in medical, your defibrillator, the web interface runs as root. Yeah, let that sink in for a minute. Your defibrillator has a web interface, right? Your IV pump, of course, your drug pump, probably running as root. But look, in general, services in most systems that we compromise, not running as root anymore. AppArmor profiles restrict what we can do even when we exploit a service. In a lot of cases, I can't write to specific areas that I'd like to be able to write to. This makes me a sad panda, right? I'm kind of, I want to be able to go exploit and own stuff. And look, app configurations, we run into this one a lot. A lot of app configurations create accounts for users on our Linux servers, even when the user will never interactively log on to that server. A great example of this, sometimes we have some mail servers, and again, whether or not these users have a shell, whether or not they should have a shell, many of them frequently do have a shell. Here they sit, this Linux server is hanging out there. If we have credentials, sometimes we can just go log in as that user. Now, I know what you're thinking. If the user's never logged on here, what does that give me? And the answer is nothing until you elevate, right? Because, I mean, there's just nothing there for you to exploit, or nothing there for you to steal, because they never log on. But maybe we can find something that can help us elevate to root or elevate to another user that can get us root. We could wait for a new vulnerability. If we get onto a box and we can't exploit it immediately, we can wait for a new vulnerability and hope that we weaponize it before the target patches. If MS 1710 earlier this year taught us anything, I used to go with MSO 8067, but I mean, it's 2017 now. People are patching that finally, thank goodness. Look, if MS 1710 taught us anything earlier this year with WannaCry and Petya, it's that people don't patch, even when we know the vulnerability is bad. And I think Petya kind kind of highlights this a little bit, right? WannaCry hits in May. A few weeks later, Petya kicks off, or not Petya, whatever we're calling it today. Not Petya kicks off, and I mean, in between, we should have seen a lot of people patching. We saw some, we didn't see nearly as much as we had hoped. Right? So again, maybe we could wait. We could wait and hope we can beat the target to a patch. Look, this may work for APT, right? The advanced phishing threat. It may even work for red teamers, right, who have infinite time and space. Realistically, for pen testers, the scope is too short. Right? If I get on the server and I was like, well, we had a plan to elevate, it was to wait for a vulnerability. So if you can delay that report by 6 months, that'd be great. I don't think it's going to work, right? Look, pen testers, we need more techniques to elevate privileges quickly. Look, the reality here is you demonstrate value that's far beyond Nessus, far beyond being a pen test puppy mill candidate, right? Again, you're basically demonstrating that you know how to work through a system, you know how to go find custom vulnerabilities in the system. So let's start with command histories, right? So history is very, very convenient. Users love histories. They love being able to go find these, to up arrow through their commands. The reality is attackers like these too. I do a little happy dance every time I see a big shell history popped out because I find all kinds of stuff. It's not just Bash, by the way. There are tons of different apps that contain histories. MySQL is one that I don't see people talk about a lot or exploit a lot. But MySQL, if you have somebody that does like a DBA that does a bunch of command line work, they put some really crazy sensitive queries together, right, including like stuff where they update users' passwords in the MySQL database. And again, that's stored in clear text in their history. And if their UMask is set wrong, the default permissions on that are world readable. And when I say set wrong, I mean set default, right? So if it's set default, world readable permissions, right? So if I can get in there and start doing some world readable permissions, game on, right? Bash history, of course, may point me to a password or a secret file or another host. Whatever, right? So welcome to the playground, right? So as we get into the playground and take a look at what can we find with histories, let's get in and take a look at a Bash history demo here. So I was talking with my good friend Trevor, late friend Trevor, a while ago, and so anyway, Trevor, we were able to get Trevor's account on the machine, and you can see that Trevor's got quite a history here. All he wanted was a milkshake, yeah. I mean, who knew? Anyway, so as we go through Trevor's command history, his shell history, you can see Trevor's a developer. And we kind of see it looks like he's building out some secure shell daemon stuff going on. It's a little bit difficult to see here. Kind of scrolling through a little bit more, and yeah, there's some ports and some... What else is Trevor up to here? Okay, to-do.txt, that seems pretty cool. I like that. But this is where things get cool, because occasionally people try to do something and then don't quite get there, right? Notice up here he does a MySQL, which is almost MySQL, but not quite, right? Now, what Trevor does without realizing it is immediately pops it's a secret into the command prompt, right? And this is the kind of thing that we see occasionally. Let me see if I can find the spot here back again. Immediately pops it's a secret into the command prompt. He has it in the copy-paste buffer, right? He's ready to go. This totally makes sense, and we see this in command histories and shell histories all the time. I've done this. I would challenge to find a person in here who hasn't done this, right? Where you mistyped the command, you're ready to go, you pasted it, and what do you do in that case? Nuke the command history, but that's not enough, because if you've taken 504, you know that when you log out normally, it's going to write your new command history. It's not just nuke the current one, you got to go unset the history, and if then you're on HPUX, it's still going to write it back anyway, and then you come back in and nuke it. It's ridiculous. Anyway, point being here, we now have the opportunity to potentially, let's see, right? Let's see what we can do from here, or what Trevor can do from here. Well, it's not really Trevor. It's an attacker, of course, pivoting off of Trevor's account. So we're going to log in his root to the MySQL server. Show databases seems pretty reasonable. Servers, okay, cool. Show tables auth, okay, that seems, again, reasonable. Oh, wah, wah, wah. And so you see that Ed has a password of my office is cooler than yours, and it clearly is. His office is definitely cooler than mine. There is no doubt about that. So look, basically here we've pivoted from an errant paste in a shell history, right, to compromise of another machine, compromise of another user's account. Are we root? No, but are we getting new data that we shouldn't have access to? Abso-freaking-lutely, right? So again, granted, a couple of good laughs here, right, and that's cool, but the reality is here that we don't want to undersell the ability to go exploit these command histories. They are frequently awesome sources of information. Let's take a look at sudo, right? Love sudo. This is my favorite XKCD comic ever, bar none, right? For those who are not familiar with sudo, sudo is super user do. It allows you to go do something as some other user, very often root, right? And so the sudo command is just a plethora of awesome, right? There's a number of Linux commands that have extra functionality built in. A lot of system admins don't even realize that these commands have the ability to do other things, right? So we have actually seen people with sudo Python before, which is mind-blowing to me, because at that point you can do anything from the Python command line. I'm not going to get into that. But look, find is one that we see a lot of help desk users have, right? So where the system admin's not really comfortable with the help desk having root, but they are comfortable giving them find, because with find they basically show them the command. They're like, here, go delete these big files in the temp directory, right? And they have to be root for, and they're like, hey, just do a sudo find, and you can get a shell with that. Turns out that you can get a shell with less and more as well. Look, when you get into abusing sudo or abusing find, I'll mention find specifically with sudo. I have totally screwed this up on a pen test before. It's one of those losing kind of moves. And what you want to do is you're going to do a bin bash -i here, basically saying I want to get an interactive prompt. And I did one of these where I was like, find root -exec. Ooh, because that finds everything and it launches a brand new shell every time. And then you control D and you're like, gone, gone, gone. And it's every file on the system. Don't do that. Actually, every file and directory on the system. Eventually, 3 or 4 in, you're like, oh, let me go kill that parent process. And, right? But alas, don't do that. All right? So get something that's only going to find one file matching, because how many root shells do you really need? I mean, is it a competition? Meh. Anyway, I like to call this the sudo slide, right? Because very often when admins create sudo permissions for people, they end up setting up playgrounds, something like this. And of course, we would never let our kids play here. The reality is that, of course, our system admins let us play here all the time. So let's take a look with less. And in this case, we've compromised an account named Alyssa, and we're going to go target poor Alyssa's sudo permissions here. Let's see. There we go. So one of the first things we're going to do when we get on is we're going to check, and we do this regularly, to see are there commands we can abuse with sudo -l. We're going to less varlog messages, and you can see, of course, permission denied. And this is one of the reasons that admins give away these permissions. They say, hey, look, you need to be able to read the logs so that before I come in, before I get the call in, we're good to go. Now, notice here what I'm doing is I'm dropping an editor mode in less, which a lot of admins don't realize that you have it all anyway. We're dropping an editor mode, and once we're in editor mode, we are basically saying go spawn a shell, and now we're root. Again, the reason your admins are giving this permission away to a lot of users, and again, look for this particularly with help desk users, right? Help desk users slash support type personnel, right? Maybe who don't normally have root, but they need them to be able to go look at log files they don't normally have permissions to. And I've actually had admins come back and they're like, it's less. What's the worst that can happen? I'm like, a shell. That's, I mean, like root. Total system compromise? I don't know. Where do you want me to go with this, right? How about find, right? So again, we're going to take a look at poor hapless user, come onto the system. And again, as we take a look at find, this one is pretty much the same thing. We're dropping right into root. And I mentioned before, again, a lot of times our admins are giving this permission away because what they want is the ability for people to be able to clear out temp files. If you've driven in at 3 in the morning before to go clear out temp files because some errant process went crazy, you know what this is all about, right? So this is the syntax effectively here, and you can see, of course, we get UID and GID of root. We are effectively root, right? So again, in this case, I'm making sure that we find in var log the name file messages, and then this bash -i, and this little guy over here, if you're not familiar with find, the semicolon is necessary here basically to terminate the command that find is going to run on each file. If you're not familiar with find, totally get familiar with find. And by the way, there are dozens of commands in Linux that you can do this with that have extra functionality. Regularly on pen tests, when we do a sudo -l and we see a new one, we're like, let's figure out how we can abuse this. And most often there's a way. Sometimes it's not directly getting a shell, sometimes it's overwriting a file and then waiting, but again, given opportunities, we'll certainly figure out a way. So insecure permissions, Chmod, love Chmod. Chmod is either my best friend or my worst enemy. And I'll be honest, in a lot of cases, it's both, right? Look, as a system admin, I love Chmod. I love to come in and set permissions. And of course, we should set permissions as restrictive as possible. We know this least privilege. But system admins oftentimes, a little errant Chmod here, an errant Chmod there, no big deal. I like to think about permissions a lot like this, right? Where, again, we put security in place. I actually forget security. This is compliance. This is PCI in a photo, right? So as we get into permissions, what am I looking for here? I'm looking for startup scripts, cron jobs, user bash RCs, anything that I can read that's going to get executed at some later time in the context of a user whose account I do not currently own. Because if the bash RC, for instance, right, when a user logs in, their bash RC is going to get executed. Well, can I write to it? Gosh, I hope not. If I can, we have a fundamentally crazy problem going on. But sometimes I can read it. And sometimes I read it and I find that it calls some command somewhere else that I can write to, maybe a script or something else I can write to. Sometimes it calls a script that calls other things that I can write to, and it's like a Pantene commercial, right? You lather, rinse, repeat, right, until you find something awesome. So again, we're going to go abuse these, and oftentimes this comes through group write permissions, right? So look, I'll tell you in a lot of cases, we just shake our heads and go, I don't know why this command or why this particular file had more permissions than it should have. Sometimes I think that it's a system admin with an errant chmod -r. If you're not familiar with the -r, it's the recursive switch. And I think some admins sometimes accidentally run that as root and recursively through a directory tree or sometimes through users' home directory cause some problems. So alas, coming into SSH style, take a look at us abusing SSH here. And so we've got this account, non-root account, and we want to take a look at how we can beat up on some stuff. Notice John's account here is world readable, right? This shouldn't be. In a sane environment, this wouldn't be, but John's account, as it turns out, totally is. And what do you know? He's got now his UMask here is set by default to create world readable files, and that's a default in Linux anyway. The directory piece is not, but that's likely an errant chmod from the admin. And we're going to create a directory here. We're going to copy over his backups because why wouldn't we? Right? I don't know what they are, but I mean they're bound to be fun. And so we go ahead and copy over John's backups and take a look at what's in those backups because frequently we find some awesomeness there. Wow. I thought that I'd cleaned that one up a little bit more, but apparently I still have the old one in there. Anyway, so look, we've got a .sh directory, and this is never a good thing. Right? Notice here we've got private key and known host. It says localhost. So we go ahead and give it basically the ID of this current key. We're going to go ahead then and go knock over the box. Asks for password. Wah wah wah. So we're going to start guessing accounts here, and what do you know? John's actually a system admin, and this is kind of his backdoor. Now look, whether it's localhost, whatever, it doesn't really matter. You get the idea here. My point here is go scavenge the system. Look for things you can read, and then look at ways that you can go abuse those things that you can read. Us finding keys in backup files is I don't want to say every pen test occurrence, but it's a frequent occurrence, right? And again, we can't normally read John's ID.rsa, or sorry, ID_RSA. In fact, SSH won't even allow the key-based authentication if anybody but John can read it, right? But that doesn't apply to backups. Does not apply to backups. Go abuse the backups because they're awesome, right? Let's take a look at another example here. This one's actually a little bit more complicated, and we see this a lot with third-party software, right? So I'm going to start this guy up over here on the one terminal here, and he's basically monitoring my UID to see if I've elevated to root. Notice here we do a cron, basically looking at our cron tab, and we see that there's this custom script that runs called ipreport.sh. And here we're taking a look at what is ipreport in the first place. Well, I don't know, maybe they're troubleshooting something here, but it calls this command myip. What is myip? I've never heard of this before, right? So I'm going to run which here to find out where is it, what does it do. And what kind of permissions does it have? Well, this is horrible because, look, as root, right, we can see in cron tab, as root, it's running IP report every minute to do some diagnostic. When it runs IP report calls my IP. My IP, as it turns out, is world writable. Look, sometimes, and it may not be world writable, it may just be group writable to me. Right? Here I'm going to go ahead and run a little script called getroot, because why not? Right? And we'll go ahead then and fire up this getroot, and we're going to tell it to getroot for rendition. We put that in my IP, and wait, and wait, and wait, and root. Okay? So again, basically what we're doing here is this little getroot.sh, and there's dozens of ways to do this. This guy basically is resetting my UID in the password file to 0. Right? So basically log out, log back in, and I'm automatically root. Right? So again, what are we doing here? We're looking at third-party software. We're looking at insecure permissions on third-party software and things that we know are going to automatically execute. Now, listen, I know this is a toy example, a trivial example, and in fact, we only had to go 1 layer deep here. Oftentimes, we have to go 2 or 3 layers deep. Sometimes it's not an cron job. We have to go hit somebody's bash RC and wait for them to log in. But I mean, again, this is still a demonstration of a great vulnerability. So I'll close out with my favorite here, setuid, the system admin's Pandora's box, man. Setuid is so cool. If you're not familiar with setuid commands run in the context of the file owner, not the regular user. This find command, if you take nothing else away from this talk at all, right, besides Ed's secret password, right, definitely copy down the find command or take a screenshot or whatever. We'll publish the slides for sure. But look, what we're looking for here are setuid and setgid programs. Because they run in the context of the user and not the context of the owner and not the context of the current user, these things are freaking awesome. Because if they've got a vulnerability, any kind of vulnerability, we have a privilege escalation. We can look for buffer overflows, format string vulnerabilities, insecure API usage, etc. Coming back to the playgrounds, I mean, again, how can you not? My setuid playground, again, it's literally littered with bodies, right? So let's take a look at a vulnerability here. So I hop onto my machine here, and you can see that I don't have root. I've got the regular little $ guy there. I'm going to go into user bin, and I'm going to look for, and in this case, I'm only looking for setuid. I'm not looking for setgid as well. And notice down here, I see something I know, but this check host guy is brand new to me. Right? So we're going to see, is he setuid, and if so, setuid what? Whoa, root. Okay, so setuid root, what now? Well, it says that the usage for this is check IP or check host IP or host name. Let's run it and see what happens normally. Okay, cool. Right. We're going to run a command called ltrace. And ltrace is magic because it goes in and looks at the libraries that are actually being, library calls that are actually being made. And I know this is pretty noisy, but notice what happens here. System, all right, the API call system calls ping with no path. There's no path, right? Now, the way this should have happened, one, is nobody should have ever done this. This is an insane program. You should never write one like this, and practically every one of you has one of these running currently on one of your systems someplace, right? Custom apps, your app developers, your contracted stuff, I'm not going to name names like Oracle or, well, anyway. So different vendors write horrible stuff like this, right? And so, again, we don't have a path here. That's really going to be the root of our problem, right? So let's take a look at how to exploit this, because if we control the path, we control where that command runs from, right? So we come in here and we're going to go and do a, here we go. Sorry, I went one too far there. So let's start by getting an Etsy shadow, right? So what are we going to do here? So I'm going to make a little temporary directory for myself, and if you recall, we had ping and grep, and neither of them had a path. Now, here I'm using Dash, and oftentimes I have to bring Dash with me. Dash is a magical shell. It doesn't have all the fully featured awesomeness of Bash, but it does something very, very important, and it's that it doesn't drop setuid permissions. Bash hates setuid. Right? And I mess with Bash a bunch, and it just fights me, and forget it, I just bring Dash with me. Just bring it with you. Right? So check host, good to go. Here I'm going to export path equals $path. So now anything in my current directory gets called first, and what do you know? Now we've got the password hashes, right? So we can begin cracking those offline using John the Ripper. I'm contractually obligated in any SANS course to mention John the Ripper and Netcat in context at some point during the course. We've now talked about John the Ripper in context, and as far as context for Netcat, of course, if we had bash instead of dash, we could just use the dev TCP option, and then of course to replace Netcat. So contractual obligation fulfilled. Okay, so finally one more here and we'll close it out. I want to show you going to auto root because cracking hashes is just, I mean, and there's dozens of ways to do this, but cracking hashes is a pain in the butt, right? So, I mean, it can be a pain in the butt. And so what I prefer to do here is, why don't I just copy dash over here and we'll call it backdoor and then we'll chown it to root. Because remember, this is going to run in the context of root, right? And so, and then we'll chmod u plus s, cool, back to backdoor. Yeah, see, I tried to type backdoor, right? Yay. Okay, so we'll path equals dot again. And drop to path, and then we'll go run our check host. And there's backdoor. And we're root. Yep. Okay, so look, closing thoughts, right? We got to wrap this up because Ed's got a closing to do. I've got boxes to go pwn someplace else, I'm sure. Look, creativity and persistence are key here. I have to highlight here, Nessus will not find a single one of these vulnerabilities for you. Rapid7, Nexpose will not find a single one of these for you. Saint will not find these for you. There's not a vulnerability scanner on the planet that finds these for you. Now, before somebody jumps up and tells me, rushes the stage and tells me, hey, Nessus can find set UID, totally, got it, tracking. But you have to understand how to go exploit those, how to take advantage of those. There's no scanner on the market that's going to find these for you. There's no scanner on the market that's going to help you elevate to root like this, right? By the way, too, notice that I had 0 chance ever of crashing the box, ever. Unlike a kernel vulnerability, 0 chance of crashing the box ever, which means my paycheck is intact, right? My job is intact. I don't have a resume updating event. Look, there's a lot of techniques. These are the techniques that we typically use to go escalate privileges on Nix machines. Look, combining techniques, you can get past the big bag of fail, right? Because that happens a lot, unfortunately. Look, as far as wrap-ups, I would love to spend more time doing this. I have dozens of other techniques we could talk about. There's trust relationships. There are a ton of these like help desk helper programs that we have just pwned the tar out of. There's something called LD preload. If you're not familiar with that, you should totally become familiar with it because that's awesome. There's script path injection flaws that we haven't really talked about. I'm sure that there's, well, we've got lots of other stuff that's not on the list here. As far as stuff we did cover, we talked about histories. We talked about SUID and GUID. Specifically here, SUID, set UID, but set GID is also good. Sudo, and then of course insecure permissions. So I'll go ahead and close it out here. If you come hit me up, Ed's going to do his closing here. But if you come see me before you go, I've got the 10 Commandments of Exploit Mitigation card, as well as the 12-step program for overcoming an insecurity addiction. If you want one of those, stop by up front here after Ed does his closing. Ed?
There's plenty of time for questions for Jake. Yes, Derek.
You said that there were a bunch of other things that we didn't cover. So do you have like a blog post to
Do I have a blog post? Man, I have dozens of blog posts that are in development. This one...
I will tell you one. There is one that was written, I think it was 2, maybe 3 years ago by Jeff McJunkin. In fact, pretty sure it was 3 years ago on escaping restricted shells. It's on the Sans Pen Test blog. And we released that one as a hint for Holiday Hack Challenge 2014. By the way, everything that our team does is a hint for Holiday Hack Challenge when we do it in November and December. Josh, that presentation was fantastic this morning, by the way. Maybe that was amazing. A hint for Holiday Hack Challenge. Also, just a show of hands, for those of you who've played NetWars before, or who have written NetWars challenges, did Jake's presentation there just kind of feel like a partial tutorial on how to get through some of NetWars challenges? Raise your hand if you think that. Thank you, Jake. yeah. Also,
for those
Jake,
who haven't played tonight.
For those who haven't played, yeah, what he just did, that's great for NetWars. Also, I really liked your talk and how it sort of kind of went hand in hand with Kirk Hayes' earlier talk on Windows, right? So that was kind of neat how that did a great job. I really appreciate it. Other questions though for Jake? Look at Jeff McJunkin's blog though; it's good stuff.
Is Sims in here by chance? Steven's not in here? No.
Yeah.
Steven mentioned yesterday as he got up here, he mentioned Cole and Eric Cole and a couple of other people. If you have the chance to sit down with Steven Sims, he is bar none one of the smartest people that I know.
He
And
really is.
he's exactly the same person that Cole is. Basically him to me is what Cole is to him. I took a SANS class with Steven back in 2008, and I've never looked back. If not for him, I wouldn't be here. So, yeah.
Very good.
Perfect. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, Jake Williams.